This is my true story. On a regular Tuesday afternoon, my son told me I wasn't family. "You're just some old guy we let live here," he said in front of his wife, in front of my granddaughter, in the middle of my own house. I didn't respond. I just nodded once, walked down the hall, and closed the door to the guest room. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The sound of his words didn't leave the air, not even when I shut the door behind me. It hovered there, not loud, not cruel in tone, but in how ordinary it sounded. Like he'd been thinking it for a long time, like everyone in the house already agreed. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the one they'd slowly turned into a storage space over the past year, and looked around at what I used to call home. The walls were lined with unopened Amazon boxes. The closet was packed with Nora's winter coats. A pile of their daughter's art projects was stacked in the chair I once used for reading. It had been a slow, silent eviction. I just hadn't noticed. My name wasn't on the title of the house. I'd paid the down payment, I'd co-signed the mortgage, but when the market dipped and my pension barely covered groceries, I told them I'd move in temporarily. That was 4 years ago. I did the dishes, paid half the bills, babysat without asking questions. I assumed that was enough to keep some respect. Apparently, it wasn't. They didn't even say it behind my back. He looked me in the face when he said it. That was the part that stuck in my chest. Like it wasn't meant to hurt, just to clarify things. I was a guest now, and guests can be asked to leave. I stayed in that guest room the rest of the evening. No one came to check on me. No knock on the door, no text. Not even from my granddaughter, who usually peeked in before bedtime to show me her drawings. I heard them laughing downstairs while I sat on a twin bed with a sagging mattress and a bent reading lamp that barely lit the wall. I listened to the clink of silverware, the faint murmur of a streaming show, Nora's voice correcting my son about how he folded towels. Life carried on without me. I wasn't missed. I wasn't even included. They'd said the quiet part out loud, that I wasn't part of the family, just some old guy they let stay here, like a tenant they couldn't evict fast enough. And the worst part? I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I was numb. Frozen in a kind of quiet confusion. How did it get this far? I thought back to the day they asked me to move in. My son said, "We've got space, Dad. It'll be good to have you around." Nora even offered to clear out her home office to give me a room. That room became their gym, then their laundry station. Eventually, I ended up in the guest room, the smallest one, near the garage, with no closet. But I didn't complain. I never asked for ownership or privacy or thanks. I just paid for groceries. I watched their kid. I fixed the sink twice. I even lent Nora money for her root canal last winter. And now, in the span of one sentence, I'd been erased. Not a father, not a member of the household, not family, just a burden with a toothbrush and fading usefulness. I stared at the ceiling that night, hearing my son laugh in the living room. Not a cruel laugh, just normal. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. Something in me had cracked clean down the center, and in that fracture, something else started to grow. Not bitterness, not rage, something quieter, sharper, cold, deliberate clarity. They saw me as a guest. Then maybe it was time to show them what happens when the guest decides to leave. For good. I didn't leave the room for the next 2 days. Not out of spite, not to draw attention, but because something inside me had finally gone quiet. The kind of silence that comes after a long, slow erosion. I didn't want their apologies. I wanted to observe, to listen. I listened to their conversations through the vents. I memorized their routines. I tracked their movements like an engineer watching a system break itself down. Every morning at 8:15, Nora left with Ava for preschool. At 9 o'clock, my son would come downstairs in sweatpants, pour himself oat milk, and open his laptop for remote work, which I knew was mostly watching YouTube and playing fantasy sports. Around 10:30, he'd call someone, sometimes a client, sometimes a friend, and complain about how tired he was. "I swear, man, it's like I've got a third kid in the house." That was me, the third kid, or maybe the uninvited house guest. He said it casually, never with malice, just comfort. That's what bothered me most. Not that he said it, but that it came out so easily, so naturally, like they'd all been thinking it for a while. And maybe they had. Maybe they just never had the nerve to say it out loud until that day in the kitchen. Maybe they assumed I knew already, that I understood my place, that I was grateful just to breathe their air. But gratitude runs both ways. Or it should. I started keeping track. A notebook, hidden under the guest bed. Every dollar I'd contributed since moving in. Groceries, utilities, lawn care, car maintenance. I had receipts going back 4 years. I totaled it all. $38,420. That's what I had spent while living for free in their home, not including the $110,000 I wired them to help cover the down payment when the market spiked, not including the $8,000 I gave them for Nora's dental surgery, not including the thousands I spent on their daughter, birthday gifts, ballet classes, a pink bicycle with training wheels. Not a single thank you for any of it. Just a casual sentence from my son in a kitchen I'd helped remodel. "You're just some old guy we let live here." And then the silence that followed. No one corrected him. No one flinched. That's when it clicked. I wasn't just disrespected. I was tolerated. Like a worn couch they couldn't replace yet. Like something they'd have to deal with until it sorted itself out. Until I became too sick, too expensive, or simply too inconvenient. I started looking at the house differently after that. Not like a home, like an asset, a machine. One I'd helped build and keep running. And like any system, it could be shut down if it no longer served its purpose. They forgot who helped them qualify for the loan in the first place. They forgot I still had access to everything. I wasn't on the title. True. But my name was on the original bank draft. My emails were still on file with the mortgage broker. I still had the login to their realtor portal because I helped submit half the paperwork when they were buying the place. And I remembered something else, something they'd probably forgotten. When they bought the house, they couldn't afford the full down payment. I paid half of it, not as a loan, not with strings, but because I believed family helped family. I told them, just pay me back if and when you can. That day never came, but I never pressed them. I wanted to be the father who gave without resentment, who supported without judgment. But they had mistaken grace for weakness, and now that mistake was going to cost them everything. I spent that third night lying awake, planning, not yelling, not sulking, planning. And when morning came, I waited until they were both out of the house, Nora at work, my son at a chiropractor appointment, and I sat down at the old desktop in the hallway and pulled up their homeowner portal. The password was still the same, a VA 2020, their daughter's birth year. I logged in, quietly, methodically. I didn't change anything. I just took notes. Mortgage balance, escrow details, property tax schedule. I took screenshots. I printed statements. I saved everything to a flash drive I'd kept from my old job. It still had my company's logo on it, a little triangle with the words, "Always one step ahead," fitting. That night, I lay in bed and watched them through the open guest room door. My son passed the hallway with his plate of reheated pasta. Nora brushed her teeth while scrolling through her phone. Their daughter laughed at something on TV. It all looked so normal, but I was already gone in my mind, a man packing bags they hadn't noticed. I didn't speak to them the next day, or the day after. I didn't need to. Something had changed, and I think they felt it. My son knocked once on the guest room door on Friday afternoon, but when I didn't answer, he walked away without asking again. That told me everything I needed. I was no longer worth the follow-up. Good. That would make the next step easier. On Saturday morning, I left early, took the bus into town, met with a lawyer I found through a friend, explained the situation, gave her the documents, showed her the payment trail from my accounts. "You paid over 50% of the equity in this house," she said, eyebrows raised. "And you're not listed on the deed?" "Didn't want to complicate things at the time," I said quietly. "But now they've complicated it for me." She nodded. "You have a case. It won't be easy, but it's winnable, especially if we move quickly." I told her I wanted one thing. Just one. I didn't want them jailed. I didn't want their names ruined. I didn't want revenge that came with noise. I wanted to sell the house, quietly, legally, before they knew what hit them. She nodded again. It'll take some work, but we'll start with a lien. Make it happen, I said. They said I'm just some old guy they let live here. Let's see how well they do when the old guy decides he's done being silent. I signed the paperwork. I left the office. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I was walking forward. Not surviving. Acting. I returned home later that afternoon with a paper bag of groceries in one hand and a flash drive in the other, the physical weight of both oddly equal. The air felt different as I walked up the driveway, cleaner, sharper, like the house already knew something was about to change. My son was mowing the lawn, a rare act of effort. Nora stood on the porch talking on her phone, barely glancing at me as I passed her. I went straight to the guest room and shut the door quietly. The house I had paid for was buzzing with energy I no longer belonged to. But I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I felt clarity, precision. I opened my drawer and pulled out the envelope where I had kept all original wire receipts and transaction notes from the down payment 4 years ago. They had never asked for documentation. They were just grateful I had stepped in, or so they said. But now those documents were evidence, proof that I wasn't a guest, that I was, in fact, the only reason this roof existed over their heads. I laid everything out on the bed in rows: bank transfers, home inspection costs I paid out of pocket, even a $7,800 check I wrote to cover the closing fees when their bank account overdrafted that September. All of it. Labeled, neatly dated. I had kept these things because I was raised in a generation that kept records, that filed things, that believed order could prevent disaster. And now, those habits were going to save me. I emailed copies of the documents to my lawyer, subject line, ownership contributions, confidential. She responded within the hour. This is strong. I'll begin proceedings Monday morning. I didn't need to do anything else. The process had been set in motion. Once the lien was filed and served, it would appear as a cloud on the property's title. They wouldn't be able to refinance, restructure, or sell the house without resolving it. And resolving it would mean either paying me my share or selling the house outright. I didn't care which. I wasn't staying here either way. That weekend, I played my part perfectly. I smiled politely when Nora passed me in the hallway. I nodded at my son when he asked if I could feed the dog while they went to brunch. I even offered to fix a leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. They accepted my help without question, like they always had. But behind the smile, something had changed permanently. I was no longer the man who tolerated being spoken to like an unwanted relic. I was now the man who would remove himself, with precision, and take the house with him. On Monday morning, I heard the mailbox clang open at exactly 10:12 a.m. I was in the kitchen making coffee. My son was on a conference call. Nora was scrolling through her tablet at the counter. I opened the door before they could reach it. A letter-sized envelope sat inside, thick with legal papers. I took it out, scanned the return address, and placed it neatly in the center of the dining room table. This came for you, I said quietly, and went back to my room. 30 minutes later, I heard the yelling. Not loud, not violent, just panicked, confused, defensive, paper rustling, a drawer slammed, Nora's voice cutting through the wall. He can't do this! Then silence. I lay on the bed with my hands folded behind my head, staring at the ceiling fan I'd installed for them 2 summers ago. It spun lazily, unbothered, like me. By dinner, they hadn't spoken to me, but I could feel it, the tension hanging in the air like static before a thunderstorm. Something had cracked, and they didn't know how deep the fracture ran yet. I heard my son pacing in the hallway, talking on the phone in clipped tones, probably calling a lawyer, maybe his mother, who I hadn't seen in years, maybe a friend who still believed I was a doddering old man lucky to have a roof over his head. I didn't care. None of it mattered. The lien was filed. The clock had started. I gave them 3 days. 3 days to either speak to me or ignore me, to recognize what they'd triggered or to pretend nothing was happening. They chose the latter. They tiptoed around me, barely making eye contact, whispering behind closed doors like children caught with stolen candy. On the fourth day, I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent. Not one of those flashy ones with Instagram videos and fake teeth. A quiet man named Dennis, who specialized in private sales and court-ordered partitions. "Do you live in the house currently?" he asked during our meeting. I nodded. "And you're seeking a sale?" "Yes," I replied. "I want out, and I want it clean." He reviewed the legal documents, the equity split, the lien. His eyebrows didn't move once, just a professional, doing his job. "This won't be quick, but it will be final. If the judge orders the sale, your son and his wife won't have a say." "That's the point," I said. "They made it clear I'm not family. Just some old guy they let live here." Dennis didn't react. He simply tapped his pen once and said, "Then it's time to stop living like a guest." That night, I cooked dinner, something I hadn't done in weeks. I made pasta carbonara, a dish my son used to beg for when he was little. The smell brought him into the kitchen like muscle memory. He stood in the doorway, eyes darting between me and the stovetop. "What's this?" he asked. "Dinner," I said. "Figured I'd cook while I still can." The words hit him like a delayed punch. He didn't respond, just nodded slowly and walked back upstairs. Nora never came down. Ava peeked in and said, "That smells good, Grandpa." And my chest cracked slightly. Just a fracture. Nothing fatal, but enough to remind me why I'd stayed as long as I had. She was the only one who saw me without resentment or obligation. The only one who didn't treat my presence like a negotiation. I served myself a plate, ate in silence, washed the dishes, and returned to the guest room. The next morning, the second letter arrived. This time it was from the court, a notice of proceedings, a formal acknowledgement of the equity dispute and the petition for forced sale. I didn't bring it inside this time. I left it in the mailbox and waited. By noon, Nora retrieved it. By 12:05, I heard yelling again. She accused my son of lying about the original contribution. He swore he never thought I'd go through with it. She cried. He cursed. And I sat in the garden with a crossword puzzle, enjoying the breeze. I could hear them through the screen door, unraveling slowly. Brick by brick, just like they had unraveled my dignity. No one came to speak to me directly, but I didn't expect them to. People rarely confront the consequences they create. They just react to them. That evening, my son finally knocked on the door. Just once. Then opened it. "Dad," he said, not like a greeting, more like a question. I looked up from my notebook. "Yes?" He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting. Are you really doing this?" I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked over to the nightstand, and pulled open the drawer. Inside was the note I'd written the night I first heard his words. I handed it to him. He read it slowly, then again. His lips moved as he traced the sentences. When he finished, he folded it neatly and looked at me with something between anger and shame. "You don't have to do this." "I know," I said calmly, "but I will." He didn't argue. He just left the room and didn't return. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I had won, but because for the first time in decades, I had stopped allowing people to subtract from me without consent. The next morning, the silence in the house wasn't just quiet. It was damaged. It was the kind of silence I remembered after my wife passed away. The kind where nobody knows what to say, so they just say nothing. Words became rationed. Every exchange became transactional. "Ava, get your backpack. Did you feed the dog? We're out of coffee." No warmth, no commentary, just operations. I moved through that house like a shadow nobody wanted to acknowledge. Not hated, just inconvenient. And I preferred it that way. It let me observe without performance. My son didn't say good morning. Nora passed me in the hallway and adjusted a picture frame I wasn't standing near. Ava waved as usual, but even she sensed something had shifted in the adults around her. I sat in the corner of the kitchen reading the paper, letting them stew. They didn't know that court mediation had already been scheduled for 2 weeks out. They didn't know I had given Dennis permission to begin early buyer engagement under a private clause in our agreement. All they knew was that the house, their house, was no longer safe. And I hadn't raised my voice once. That day, Nora's mother came over. I recognized the car. A red Buick that always parked slightly crooked. She was in the living room less than 10 minutes before her voice began rising. "He's still here? You need to fix this. What if he wins?" I heard my son try to calm her. Heard Nora explain that he's not well, maybe it's just stress. But I wasn't stressed. I was calm, clear. I sat in the backyard, trimming dead leaves off the gardenias I planted when they moved in. It had been my gift to them, landscaping the back with flowering shrubs, a stone path, and a small bench where I used to sit and tell Ava stories about birds and rain patterns. They hadn't touched it in months. The path was cracked now. One of the lights was broken. Weeds had started to push between the stones. I pulled them out by hand while I listened to the sounds of panic echoing from inside. It wasn't guilt that brought me peace. It was proportion. For years, I'd made myself smaller to accommodate their comfort. I'd paid without expectation, contributed without recognition, absorbed disrespect, and wore it like a raincoat. Not pleasant, but tolerable. But that coat had frayed, and under it was a man who no longer believed silence was virtue. Around 4 p.m., my son came outside. His expression was caught between apology and irritation. "Can we talk?" he asked. I set down the garden shears and nodded. We sat on the bench, the one I'd stained by hand. "I didn't mean what I said last week," he started, "about you not being family." I let the words sit, let him squirm in the stillness. "We were tired, stressed. You know how life gets." "I do," I said simply. He looked surprised, I responded. "And Nora, she's upset. The court papers, the agent, the lien, it's a lot." "I imagine it is," I replied. "She's scared we're going to lose everything." He looked at me finally, really looked, like a man realizing the shape of the storm too late. "You wouldn't really sell it, would you?" I turned toward him, slowly. Not angry, just present. "You told me I wasn't family," I said softly. "Just an old man you let live here." His mouth opened, then shut. You meant it," I interrupted, still calm. "You said it with comfort, with truth. I heard it." He didn't argue, just rubbed his jaw, staring at the grass. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued. "The house will be listed. Mediation is scheduled. If you can buy me out, great. If not, we sell." He didn't speak. "I don't want a war," I added. "But I'm not staying in a home where I'm treated like clutter." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." He didn't argue after that, just nodded once and went back inside. That night, Nora didn't make dinner. They ordered in. I heard them eating quietly, the clink of forks on takeout containers like a metronome counting down the end. I stayed in my room, reviewing emails with Dennis. We had 2 interested buyers already, one a couple relocating from Arizona, another a small family looking to upsize before school started. I updated the spreadsheet I'd been keeping. Projected sale value, my equity return, potential relocation cities. Each number brought me peace, control, not out of greed, but out of closure. They had erased me with a sentence. Now I was erasing my presence with a signature. The following morning, Ava found me in the backyard. She sat beside me on the bench, quiet for a minute, then said, "Mommy says you're mad." "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm disappointed." She frowned. "Is that worse?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said, "because mad goes away. Disappointment stays." She was quiet again. "Will you still come to my recital?" I looked at her, her small hands folded, her socks mismatched, her eyes full of something the adults had long forgotten. Loyalty without condition. "I'll try," I said. "But things are changing." She didn't ask why. She just leaned her head against my arm. And for a moment, I questioned everything. But then I remembered the look on her father's face when he realized he didn't own the home he'd disrespected me in. And I knew Ava would survive. She would adapt. And maybe, one day, understand. Maybe. Later that week, Dennis emailed. "We've got a full cash offer. They want a quick close. Your portion, $412,000. I stared at the number, not because of greed, but because it was the first time in years I had something that belonged only to me. No strings, no let's split it conversations. Just a clean exit. I signed the acceptance form that afternoon. The court would finalize it within 10 business days. I had already packed 2 suitcases. I didn't tell them. I didn't owe them a countdown. They would find out when they tried to use their keys and the locks didn't turn. Because when the final papers were signed and the funds cleared into my account, I wouldn't just leave. I'd walk away from the idea that family was something you earned by endurance, and I'd take the title with me, literally. The 10th day came with overcast skies and a nervous stillness. It was the kind of morning that felt suspended in time, quiet but tense, as if the weather itself knew what was about to unfold. I sat in the guest room, dressed in slacks and a buttoned shirt, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug they once gave me on Father's Day. "World's best dad," it said in fading blue letters, the kind of gift a child gives when they still believe their parents are invincible. The irony had outlasted the ink. Outside, the neighborhood moved as usual, joggers passing in coordinated outfits, a garbage truck hissing its way down the street, kids riding bikes in lazy figure eights. But inside the house, something fundamental had shifted. Nora hadn't spoken to me in 3 days. My son had stopped making eye contact altogether. The only thing that passed between us was silence. Brittle, sharp, stretched thin across the drywall like spiderwebs waiting to collapse. And I let it hold. I let the discomfort grow, because this time, it was theirs to carry. At precisely 9:06 a.m., Dennis called. "It's done," he said. "Funds are wired. Ownership is officially transferred. They'll be notified by noon." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pack anything further, because everything I needed was already in my car, waiting in the garage. My toothbrush, my ID, my bank card, and a folded note I had written in quiet the night before. 4 sentences, each one chosen with the precision I'd once used when designing bridge supports. Weight, structure, balance, final load. At 9:30 a.m., I placed the note on the kitchen table. The same table I'd helped them pick out at that overpriced showroom when they first moved in. I'd paid for the delivery fee. I'd assembled the chairs. I'd tightened every bolt. Now I was leaving a final message on top of it, the way an engineer signs off on the last page of a schematic, not for glory, but for closure. I walked through the house slowly, not to linger, but to account. Every step brought back images that no longer stung. The night they brought Ava home, the Thanksgiving I cooked alone while they slept off wine, the Christmas where they forgot to buy me a gift and laughed it off. You're hard to shop for. It was always little things. Not one dagger, just 1,000 tiny cuts until the soul bleeds out from neglect. I paused briefly outside Ava's room. The door was closed, covered in crayon drawings and peeling stickers. I placed my palm gently against the wood, not to knock, not to open it, just to feel it one last time. She was the only one I would miss. Then I walked down the hall, stepped into the garage, and opened the driver's side door. I didn't turn on music. I didn't look back. The engine started with a low hum, and I pulled out of the driveway I'd shoveled, mowed, repaired, and swept for 4 years. The house stood behind me like a monument to miscalculation, not in money, but in faith. They believed my loyalty was permanent, that my kindness was their property, that my silence meant permission. They were wrong. I drove 10 minutes to a diner off Route 8, the kind with cracked leather booths and waitresses who called you Han without effort. I sat by the window, ordered eggs and toast, and waited. At 10:42 a.m., Nora called. I let it ring. At 10:47, she texted, Why are the locks changed? Did you move out without saying anything? At 11:02, my son called. I answered. Dad, what the hell is going on? He demanded, his voice rising immediately. Why can't we get in the house? I stirred sugar into my coffee. You'll need to contact the new owners, I said calmly. I left a note. What? What new owners? He barked. What are you talking about? I sold the house, I said. 10 days ago, finalized this morning. Silence. Then, you can't do that. You don't even own. I paid half the equity. I filed a lien. You ignored it. The court sided with me. Now the house belongs to someone else. You're insane, he said. This is our home. It was, I replied, until you told me I wasn't family. His voice cracked. You took everything from us. No, I said. You gave everything away. I just collected what I was owed. He cursed, loud and childlike, then hung up. I finished my coffee, ate my toast, paid in cash, walked to my car with the quiet dignity of a man who had done everything he said he would. At 2:30 that afternoon, I received a message from Dennis. They were officially notified, keys turned over, buyer satisfied. I texted back 2 words. Thank you. Then I turned off the phone and placed it in the glove compartment. I didn't need to hear the aftermath. The timeline had concluded. The equation had balanced. I had disappeared from their life, just as they said they wanted. Only I took the house with me. No drama, no screaming, no slammed doors. Just a final act of withdrawal so clean it felt surgical. I drove north toward the coast. Not because I had a plan, but because the ocean had always been the one place that made sense when life didn't. I had enough money to buy a place outright. Something small, quiet, with windows that caught the morning sun. A place where I could wake up without walking on eggshells. Where every room respected my presence. Where silence meant peace, not punishment. In the rearview mirror, I saw the skyline of the city blur. Not fade, not vanish, just recede. And with it, the weight of 4 years of tolerated disrespect. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was free. That night, I checked into a motel 2 towns over. Clean sheets, no noise, no passive-aggressive comments about the thermostat. I laid on the bed with my arms folded behind my head and watched the ceiling slowly change color as the sun dipped below the blinds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like a man reclaiming his life. I fell asleep without needing to apologize for existing. And I dreamed of nothing at all. I woke up the next morning to a quiet room and the sound of seagulls outside the window. The motel smelled faintly of salt and lemon cleaner, not unpleasant. I sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes before standing, stretching, and going to the window. The sky was pale and cloudless. A new day. The old me would have reached for the phone immediately, checking for fallout, for rage-filled voicemails, for apologies that would never come. But I didn't. I let it stay buried in the glove compartment where I'd left it the night before. Whatever storm they were swirling in now was no longer mine to navigate. I was not the anchor anymore. I was the current. I shaved, brushed my teeth, and packed up my one bag. It was the same one I'd brought with me when I moved into their house 4 years ago, thinking I'd only stay a few weeks. I carried it downstairs and checked out of the motel. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed anything for the road. I told her no, but thanked her for the quiet. She smiled like she understood that silence wasn't always lonely. Sometimes it was earned. I drove west without a destination. I passed redwood groves and open fields and clusters of houses that looked like they hadn't changed in 30 years. I stopped for gas in a town with one blinking stoplight and no chain stores. There was a diner on the corner, the kind with a crooked sign that read, "Coffee 99 cents." I went in. The waitress called me darlin' and poured without asking. I sat in the corner booth and ordered eggs, bacon, and toast. I ate slowly. For once, there was no rush, no errand list, no one waiting for me to be useful. I watched the regulars come and go. A man in overalls with sunburned arms, a pair of teenagers sharing pancakes, a mother carrying 2 paper cups with kids in the back seat. And none of them knew me. None of them saw me as a burden. None of them had ever said I was just some old man they let live in their house. I paid in cash and left a generous tip. When I walked out, the sky had darkened slightly. A fog was rolling in from the west, turning the outlines of the trees into soft shadows. I got back in the car and continued driving, following signs that led toward the coast. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small town with an overlook. I pulled into the lot and stepped out, walking slowly to the edge of the railing. Below, the Pacific stretched endlessly, blue-gray and churning, indifferent and magnificent. I stood there for a long time, hands in my pockets, breathing in the salted air. No noise, no demands, just wind and water. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing in a moment that belonged only to me. Not rented, not borrowed, not a favor someone would later resent, just mine. I took a photo, not to send anyone, just to prove to myself later that I'd been there, that I had started over. Eventually, I drove into town. A few real estate signs lined the streets. I called the number on a hand-painted board outside a weathered house with a wraparound porch. An older man named Will picked up. He asked a few basic questions, then told me to swing by his office. I did. He wore flannel and thick glasses and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. We talked about budgets, privacy, small yards, and homes with no stairs. I told him I wanted something quiet, something modest, something that didn't come with anyone else's expectations attached. He nodded like he'd heard that before. "Got just the place," he said. We drove there the next morning. A single-story cottage on a side street with seagrass growing along the fence line. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, view of the water if you leaned far enough off the porch. It was perfect. I didn't need space. I needed air. And this place had it. I made an offer that afternoon. Cash, no contingencies. Will blinked twice and said, "Well then, I guess this one's yours." We shook hands. No ceremony. No congratulations. Just a deal made between men who understood what peace looked like. Back in my car, I allowed myself one indulgence. I opened the glove box and turned on the phone. The battery had drained, so I plugged it in. When it powered up, it buzzed like it was angry. 17 missed calls, 24 texts. All from my son. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom. The last one was sent at 3:14 a.m. "I don't understand how you could do this to us." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned the phone off again and placed it back in the glove compartment. It was not mine anymore. Not really. It belonged to the man I used to be. The man who tolerated erasure in the name of love. The man who kept hoping that his quiet sacrifices would eventually echo back in gratitude. But they hadn't. And that silence had taught me more than any apology ever could. That night, I stayed at a small inn while paperwork for the new house processed. The walls were thin and the mattress was lumpy, but I didn't mind. I was rebuilding from the ground up. And starting from scratch has a way of making you appreciate imperfect things. I made tea in the little kettle, sat by the window, watched the fog roll in until the porch lights across the street vanished into it. I thought about Ava. Just her. The way she'd leaned against me in the garden. The mismatched socks. The way her eyes had looked like her mother's before time made them hard. I knew I might never see her again. That was the price. But I also knew that if I stayed, if I allowed myself to be swallowed into their bitterness, I'd become a ghost in a house I helped build. At least now I was a man with a name again. A man with a deed and a key and a front door that only opened when he said so. I went to bed just before midnight, and for the second night in a row, I slept all the way through without waking once. No footsteps above me, no arguments through the walls, no tension crawling under the doorframe, just silence, full, welcome, and mine. The next 3 days passed in a kind of gentle rhythm. The paperwork was finalized, and the cottage was officially mine. I bought a second-hand couch from a woman named Clara, who insisted on giving me a loaf of banana bread with the purchase. "My husband never sat on it," she said. "You'll break it in better." I thanked her and strapped it to the top of my car with twine. I picked up plates, sheets, and silverware from a thrift store where the cashier reminded me of my sister. Warm voice, crooked smile, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. I moved into the house with 2 bags and no furniture, but I didn't feel lacking. I felt light. Every item I carried across that threshold, I chose, not out of obligation, not out of utility, but because I wanted it. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's space. I was building one of my own. That first night, I ate dinner on the porch. Just a sandwich and a thermos of tea. The air was cool and the wind smelled like pine and salt. No television hummed in the background. No doors slammed upstairs. No muffled arguments behind closed doors. I watched 2 raccoons shuffle across the gravel driveway like tiny burglars. One of them stopped, looked at me, then continued on its way. That's how I felt. Not invisible, just unbothered. The second night, I installed a new lock on the front door. The hardware store had offered installation, but I declined. Some things feel better when you do them yourself. I stood back and tested it. Smooth. Precise. I held the key in my hand afterward and just looked at it. Simple. Quiet. Authority in the palm of my hand. The third day, a letter arrived. My name. Handwritten. I knew the scrawl before I opened it. My son. I almost didn't read it. But curiosity won. Inside were 3 pages, mostly defensive. A few lines of regret, the kind that feel edited by someone else. He wrote about stress, about misunderstanding, about how Nora never meant what she said, about how I took it too far, about how I'd always been a little sensitive when it came to family. I stopped reading, folded it once, placed it in a drawer with no name. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to answer. He didn't understand. That letter wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. A desperate effort to return to a time when he could say things and I would absorb them. When my silence was guaranteed. When forgiveness was automatic. But that version of me no longer existed, and I wasn't interested in reviving him. I spent the rest of that day planting a rosemary bush by the porch. My wife used to love the smell. Said it reminded her of summer when they were young. I knelt in the soil, patted it down, and watered it gently. It stood there like a small monument to memory. Not grief, not longing, just acknowledgement. That night, I made dinner. Real dinner. Pan-seared trout, roasted potatoes, a salad with too much vinegar. I set a single place, ate slowly, washed dishes afterward, wiped down the counter. No one else left crumbs. No one criticized how I folded the dish towel. When I went to bed, I left the window cracked just slightly, the way I used to before someone complained about the draft. I woke up to birds, not footsteps. And when I stepped outside barefoot into the dew, I felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness. Not as a pause between responsibilities, but as a presence, as ownership. The world was not rushing toward me. It was waiting. Later that morning, I received an email from Dennis. New owners have completed move-in. Transition smooth. No further contact needed. I stared at the line for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because I realized that it was truly over. The house, the tension, the role I played in their system, all gone. I wasn't a father in the center of their orbit anymore. I was a man on the outside, building a new axis. I closed the email and deleted the thread. I didn't need to revisit it. That afternoon, I drove into the next town and bought a small wooden bench from a local craftsman. He offered to deliver it, but I told him I wanted to carry it myself. It wasn't heavy. It was honest. I placed it under the tree in my new backyard, the kind of tree that bent in the wind but never broke. I sat there for an hour. No phone, no headphones, just me and the rustling leaves. I thought about Ava. I always did. About whether she'd understand one day, whether she'd forgive me for disappearing, whether she'd remember the stories I told her under the old tree back in their yard. I hoped so, but I didn't depend on it. Children inherit truths they don't understand until life repeats them. And maybe one day, when someone treats her love like a convenience, she'll think of the man who once built a garden in silence and left when he was told he didn't belong. That evening, I received a knock on the door. It startled me. No one had visited yet. I opened it slowly. A teenage boy stood there, holding a pizza box. "Order for Mr. Davis?" I paused, then smiled. "That's me." I hadn't ordered pizza, but someone had sent it. I tipped him anyway and closed the door. Inside the box was a note, folded under the corner. "I'm sorry, I miss you. Can we talk?" No signature, but I didn't need one. I placed the note in the trash, not as revenge, but as clarity. I warmed the pizza in the oven, poured myself a drink, and ate on the porch as the sky turned lavender. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat. Fully present. Fully whole. Finally home. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The world didn't end. No storms came. The quiet held. I learned the names of the neighbors on both sides, a retired schoolteacher named Helen on the left, and a widowed gardener named Thomas on the right. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was kind. Simple. "The wind's picking up. Your rosemary's growing fast. Want some lemons?" There were no awkward pauses, no tension hiding beneath courtesy, just shared space, respectfully navigated. I liked it that way. I started waking earlier, walking the same stretch of beach each morning before the fishermen returned to dock. I passed the same dogs, the same seabirds, the same crooked sign warning about sneaker waves. Some days I'd bring bread to feed the gulls. Other days I brought nothing but breath. The air felt cleaner here. Not because of salt or sea, because I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. One morning, I passed a boy, maybe 6 or 7, crouched near a tide pool, pointing excitedly at a hermit crab. His father knelt beside him, patient and smiling. I kept walking, but I watched them for a while. I wondered if that father had ever been told he was just some old guy we let live here. Probably not. I hoped never. In the afternoons, I took to reading on the porch, mostly nonfiction, old engineering books, weathered paperbacks I'd never had time for. Some afternoons, I didn't read at all. I just listened, to the wind, to the creak of my chair, to the distant drone of a plane. The first time I heard a child's laugh outside my new fence, I flinched, out of habit. But it wasn't Ava. It wasn't tied to memory. Just another kid on a bike, living a life that didn't include me. And I realized I wasn't sad. I was free. Occasionally, I would hear the echo of old voices in my head. My son, Nora, their passive scolding. The sound of a fork clinking against a plate in a house that no longer needed me unless the gutters clogged. But the voices faded faster now. Memory loses volume when there's no oxygen to fuel it. One evening, while clearing out a drawer in the cottage, I found the letter again. The one my son had written after the sale. I don't remember placing it there, but apparently I had. I unfolded it. Read it again. The words hadn't changed. But I had. What once read like guilt, now read like deflection. What once stirred hope, now stirred nothing. I folded it neatly, walked it out to the small fire pit in the yard, and lit a match. It caught slowly, then, all at once. I watched the paper curl inward, turn black, and disappear. No drama, no catharsis. Just heat and smoke and a faint trace of ink rising into the evening air. That night, I slept with the windows open. The house stayed still. The wind didn't rattle the glass. My mind didn't race. I had stopped waiting for closure that would never arrive from them. I had delivered it to myself instead. And that, I was learning, was what peace actually looked like. One morning in early spring, I visited a small bakery in town. The woman behind the counter, maybe mid-40s, smiled like she meant it. "Try the rosemary scones," she said. "They smell like your front yard." I smiled. Took 2. She asked for my name for the order. I told her, and she wrote it on the paper bag in looping ink. I hadn't seen my name written that carefully in years. Back at the cottage, I sat on the bench under the tree and ate in silence. The scone crumbled perfectly. Light, but warm. A reminder that some things come back to you in other forms. That same day, a postcard arrived in the mail. No return address, just Ava's handwriting. "Grandpa, I miss you. I don't know where you went. I drew you something, but Mom said I shouldn't send it. So I just want you to know I think about you every time I see a rosemary bush. That's still your smell. Love, Ava." I held the card for a long time. My hands didn't shake, but my eyes stung. I didn't write back. I couldn't. There was no address to send it to. And even if there had been, what would I say? That I missed her too. That I had left not because I stopped loving her, but because I started loving myself again? That some exits are the kindest form of loyalty? I placed the postcard in the drawer beside my bed. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Just kept. That night, I walked along the beach until the sky turned lavender. I thought about all the men I had known in my life who never got the chance to reclaim their dignity, who died at kitchen tables being tolerated instead of celebrated, who handed over their savings, their stories, their usefulness until nothing was left. And I thought, I did not become them. I left in time. I watched the tide come in and out, the sand shifting beneath my feet, nothing stable, yet everything inevitable. I had become like that, not anchored, but constant, not fixed, but free. By the time I got home, the cottage glowed warm through the window. The rosemary bush leaned slightly in the wind. The lock clicked behind me with a clean, simple sound. And for the first time in my life, I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone, not to any god, just to the air, to the fact that I had chosen myself before it was too late. I never saw them again. Not in person, not in photos, not in passing cars. My son never wrote another letter. Nora never called. Ava, maybe, asked about me. Maybe she remembers my voice, the garden stories, the rosemary bush, the way I always let her stir the pancake batter even when she got flour in her hair. But maybe she forgot, too. That's how life works. Children adapt. Adults explain things in ways that suit their comfort. I imagine they told her I moved away. Maybe for work. Maybe because I was sick. Maybe because I needed space. But not the truth. No one ever says, "We treated him like a burden until he left." That kind of honesty costs too much. But I didn't leave for honesty. I didn't leave for revenge. I left for survival. Because a man can only be erased so many times before he starts looking for something, anything, with edges again. And when I found this house, this town, this silence, I realized I wasn't broken. I was just misplaced. In the wrong context, even gold looks like rust. Now I live with routine, with calm, with days that stretch without tension. I read more. I cook better. I sleep longer. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. It hasn't. That silence used to be painful. Now it feels like proof. Proof that they needed me only as long as I kept giving. Once I stopped, they vanished, which means they were never really there to begin with. And I've made peace with that. I see it now. The mistake I made wasn't loving them. It was believing that love alone would earn respect. But love without boundaries isn't care, it's captivity. And I was done being the prisoner. I still walk the beach most mornings. The same stretch, the same curve, the same rock that juts out like a forgotten tooth. Sometimes I pass couples holding hands. Sometimes I pass old men walking alone like me. We nod to each other, like ghosts who recognize their own. One morning, a boy was flying a kite near the cliffs. The wind caught it just right, and it soared so high I lost track of the string. He looked up at it, not even blinking, like he trusted the wind more than gravity. I stood there longer than I expected, just watching him. I think of Ava in moments like that. Not with pain, just with softness. She was the only one who never took my presence for granted. But even children are shaped by their environment. And eventually, they inherit the narratives they're fed. I don't blame her. I just let her go. The same way I let the rest of it go. One evening, I cleaned out the last box I had carried from the old house. It had followed me through 4 moves, 2 decades, and 1 heartbreak. Inside were photo albums, receipts, a Father's Day card from 1998, one of those hand-traced cards where the fingers become turkey feathers. It said, "To Dad, the best guy in the world." I held it for a long time. Then I put it back in the box and carried it to the storage shed out back. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't need it on the shelf anymore. Some memories aren't for forgetting, but they're not for display either. They're just anchors, reminders of who we once were before the world started editing us. That night, I made soup from scratch. Turned off every light except the one above the stove. Ate standing up, barefoot, with the window cracked open and the cold air biting my ankles. It made me feel alive. Not young, not new, just real. After dinner, I sat on the bench beneath the tree and looked at the stars. No music, no phone, just the rustle of the leaves and the long, deep breath of someone who had nothing to defend anymore. That's what people don't understand about solitude. It's not loneliness. It's proof. Proof that you finally stopped asking for what no one was willing to give. A week later, the mailman knocked. First time he ever had. "Got something here you might want to sign for?" he said. I opened the envelope after he left. It was a notice. From the county clerk. A formal closure on the partition sale. Finalized, complete, case closed. I smiled, tucked it into my desk. That same evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. The kind that starts with wind and ends with a quiet hush you can't explain. I watched it from the porch. No fear, no anticipation, just gratitude. The house creaked a little. The wind chimes tangled. I sat barefoot, hands around a mug of tea, and realized something strange. I had no urge to be anywhere else. No curiosity about their new lives. No resentment. No wish to be remembered. Just stillness. At exactly 11:13 p.m., the power flickered once, then stayed on. That's how I felt. Disrupted, but never lost. I went to bed early that night, slept without dreams, and woke up the next morning with the same peace that had carried me every day since I left. Sometimes, when the sun is low and the fog hangs just right, I stand by the rosemary bush and wonder how close I came to staying too long. How many people are still stuck where I used to be, waiting for permission to reclaim their worth? And I hope they find it. Not because I'm wiser, but because I know what it costs not to. And if they don't? I hope someone they love looks them in the eye before it's too late and says, "You're not just some old guy we let live here. You are the home we forgot how to respect." But even if no one ever says that, I'll be fine. Because I said it to myself. And that, in the end, was all I ever needed.